Wake up. Wake up.
Allegorical literature was extremely common back then.
This is just a simulation. This is just a simulation.
Mark himself probably did not believe he was writing history. He was writing a symbolic message. He was writing a gospel, the good news, and symbolizing it using, biblical parallels, using parallels to pagan religions and so forth.
There are these other gospels, and there are the Apocrypha, after all. There are apocryphal New Testament and apocryphal Old Testament stories that frankly, were too folkloristic, and they got thrown out because people thought these couldn't have happened, therefore we get rid of them. But of course, some of the apocryphal stories are as interesting as the regular Bible.
So they kept in walking on water and rising from the dead, but the others, those were
not
too outlandish.
There have been attempts to it's called demythologizing. There have been attempts mostly by Jesuits and other intellectuals who say, who are upset by in a sense, the folklore, if you like. And they say, let's make this more intellectual. Let's get rid of the folklore. Let's get rid of the virgin birth, which seems unlikely. Let's get rid of all this stuff. But of course, if you take away the folklore away from the Bible, you don't have a heck of a lot left except begat, 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 begat.
Well, in the case of someone like Caesar Augustus, around whom many of the same myths clustered, we know there nonetheless was a Caesar Augustus because he's intricately tied into the history of the time, and many secular historians talk about it. You can't rewrite history without Caesar Augustus. But at the very 2 points, Jesus appears to be locked into history. These stories are either still mythical, like the slaughter of the innocents derived right out of the book of Exodus, or they contain outrageous improbabilities, such as the Jewish Supreme Council meeting on Passover Eve to get rid of these guys. It's just out of the question. Or Pontius Pilate letting go a known killer of Romans, an insurrectionist, Barabbas, and just letting Jesus be thrown to the mob after, however, trying to get him off the hook as if he has to have a vote on it. It just defies any kind of historical verisimilitude. And then when you realize, well, there were other ancient Jews and Jewish Christians that believed Jesus had been killed a century before under King Alexander Jannaeus. Or in the Gospel of Peter, it says that Herod had Jesus killed. Well, how could this be a matter of such diversity if it was a recent event that people remembered? It just begins to make you wonder, is this man really part of a historical time stream? Or doesn't it begin to look like someone has tried to put a figure, originally mythical, into a historical framework and made various stabs at it?
Can you give me an example of a story that started as fiction, it's known to have been fiction, and then it became considered real with the addition of details?
Well, we've seen this any number of times in, say, our Glurge stories, where stories have started out as actual works of fiction, where they were written by identifiable authors. They were written and provided as works of fiction. And they have since gained a life and a spread on their own, where they are now told and relayed as true stories, as this really happened tales, and are believed as such.
You are just an illustration. This is just a simulation.
You ever read that news story about the guy who was found dead and they couldn't figure out how he died? But when they did the autopsy, they found out he had a can of Spam shoved down his throat. Turns out he was a spammer, and that's why he got killed. People like the moral of that story, which is why I made it up. And when I first posted it on my weblog, I labeled it as fiction.
Jesus' life does conform to the hero pattern. It's a hero pattern with so many incidents. Raglan gave a score. He took actually the Oedipus story of all things as the basic model, and then gave other heroes scores as to how many of the 22 points they had in their lives. Because it's Raglan's pattern that is the one that I used. His mother here's the hero of tradition from Raglan's The Hero. I'm getting this from the Study of Folklore, an early book that I edited. His mother is a royal virgin. His father is a king, often a near relative of his mother, but 4, the circumstances of his conception are unusual. 5, he's also reputed to be the son of a god. 6, at birth an attempt is made often by his father to kill him, But 7, he's spirited away, and 8, reared by foster parents in a far country. 9, we're told nothing of his childhood, but 10, on reaching manhood, he returns or goes to his future kingdom. And 11, after a victory over a king or a giant or a dragon, he marries a princess. 12, 13 becomes king. 14 reigns uneventfully, but 15 prescribes laws. 16, later he loses favor with his subjects. 17 is driven from the throne of the city. 18, he meets with a mysterious death. 19, often at the top of a hill. 20, his children, if any, do not succeed him. 21, his body is not buried, but nevertheless, 22, he has 1 or more holy sepulchres. So Oedipus gets 22 points out of the 22. Theseus gets 20, Romulus 17, Hercules 17, Perseus 16, etc. I don't remember off the top how many Jesus got, but it was high.
You are just an illustration. You will live forever.
There are other similar savior figures in the same neighborhood at the same time in history. Mithras, Attis, Adonis, Osiris, Tammuz, and so forth. And nobody thinks that these characters are anything but mythical, and their stories are so similar, most of them in fact having some kind of resurrection or another, sometimes even with celebrations after 3 days and so forth, that it just seems like special pleading to say, oh, well, in this one case, it really happened.
This is just a simulation. 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 This is just a simulation.
The early church fathers understood this was a problem because they were already getting the same objections from pagans. They said, what you say about Jesus, we've been saying about the Dionysus and Hercules all the time. What's the big deal? And they didn't believe in them either anymore. And so the Christian apologists, the defenders of the faith, would say, well, yeah, but this one is true. And you see, Satan counterfeited it in advance because he knew this day would come. Boy, I tell you, that tells you two things right there, that even they didn't deny that these other Jesus-like characters were before Jesus, or they never would have resorted to something like that. Satan knew it would happen and counterfeited it in advance.
In case you're wondering, yes, this remains the explanation to this day. Fortunately for Christian leaders, they almost never have to offer it.
I'm wondering if either one of you are familiar with Osiris or Mithras or Dionysus?
I'm not.
Hardly at all.
I'm wondering if you've heard of Osiris or Mithra or Dionysus.
I've heard of Dionysus. The other two, I don't think I've heard of.
And do you know anything about Dionysus?
No, it sounds like an interesting Greek name, but no. Was he a contemporary of Jesus or the early church?
I'm wondering if you've heard any of those theories, or...
Well, you know, it's probably good that I haven't.
I've never heard of any of those gods.
Okay, but if you were...
I've never heard of any of those pagan gods, no.
No, I haven't heard about it.
Are you familiar with Osiris or Mithra or Dionysus?
I've heard about them, but I really haven't really got into it and making research on what it was about. I really haven't. So, but I've heard about it. It's been on the news a couple times, but I've never really paid attention to it. You know?
Is there anything that you know or that you've gathered from those articles?
I really haven't paid attention to it. It's all about Jesus, man. That's all you got to pay attention to, you know.
For thousands of years, humanity has been obsessed with blood sacrifice. Is it an accident that the story of the crucifixion of Jesus gave Christians a suffering hero whose flesh they could eat and whose blood they could drink? Of course, Christians today aren't obsessed with blood sacrifice anymore. Oh, well, except that they are. For many Christians, the Passion of the Christ was the single most powerful experience of their lives. I selected these quotations and I cut them all together, but I haven't enhanced the sound effects or the visuals in any way. This stuff is all in the movie, as you see and hear it right here. When it comes to Jesus movies, this movie is far and away the #1 choice of Christians. Adjusted for inflation, The Singing Jesus made $55 million at the US box office. The Horny Jesus made $13 million. But the Bloody Jesus? $370 million and still counting. Wait, did you see that? Let's go back for a second. You have to have a special effects guy with a little squirty thing just off camera to get this shot. Mel Gibson went out of his way to emphasize the blood. In fact, if you were to go through this film minute by minute and make a note every time that any blood, violence, or suffering were depicted on screen, it would look like this. The first 10 minutes go by without much gore, but for the remaining 109 minutes, only 6 contain no blood, violence, or suffering. Any film represents hundreds or thousands of individual decisions made by the director. Mel Gibson could have made his Jesus movie any way he wanted to, and he chose to make it this way. And he was right. Christians said, yes, this is the film we want.
Yeah, Dad.
Sick and tired of hearing about all of the radicals and the perverts and the liberals and the leftists and the communists coming out of the closets. It's time for God's people to come out of the closets, out of the churches, and change America. We must do it. We've got to raise up an army